Morning. This is David Roche, Quantum Strategy, and here we are with the micro podcast on macro matters. Well, the main news this morning is that China's CPI and PPI figures continued to be in deflation. In fact, although there were various one-offs this month, like pig prices, the pork prices, and so on, if you go back and you run a 3-month average, both PPI and CPI are firmly in deflation. Deflation is not good news for China recovery because what it does is it squeezes profit margins, it increases the burden of debt, and it reduces the government's fiscal revenues and therefore lessens its ability to intervene in the economy. Okay, turning on to the next big thing that is happening and happened is the overthrow of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. Now, at the moment, there is a 50% chance that the rebels, so the three parties of rebels, the HTS, which grew out of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but have seemingly firmly shed that particular coat and has now adopted a coat of armor which defends civic authorities, and has actually put this into practice both in the areas it has controlled for 6 to 8 years in Syria and in the areas it has conquered in the course of its lightning offensive of 11 days to overthrow this Assad regime. If this can become the modus operandi, a civic society and not an extreme religious society for Syria, then that would bode very well because it would be a stable Syria. However, there are other parties involved in this. One of them is the SDF, which is the Kurdish militants, and they are already fighting with the SNA, which is the faction which was founded and backed by Turkish intelligence. The SDF, the Kurdish faction, stand for the Syrian Democratic Forces. If, as appears possible, the warring factions do not manage to set up a civic state but go to war with each other, and lots of tribal disagreements underpin their organizations and are contained within their organization, then Syria, together probably with Iraq and certainly Lebanon, which we already know about, would become the scene of tribal warfare, which could last for 20 years and total chaos in what was formerly known as the Levant. At the moment, a couple of conclusions to take from this, which may be relevant to investors, certainly in the longer term, and those who are more intelligent in the exercise of their duties. And that is that this is a major defeat for Iran, and it is a major defeat for Russia. They basically were both the backers of the Syrian regime, and they've been basically kicked out. Now, Russia is still trying to maintain its 2 military bases, both of them on the coast, Mediterranean coast. One is Tartus, which is where the naval assets were kept, but they've since fled. And the other was the northerly Air Force base, which was used to maintain the Assad regime for 15 years by bombing civilians, mainly. Now, the likelihood is that Russia is out of the game, and the likelihood is that Iran is out of the game, though both may try to destabilize Syria in the future. So what that does is 2 things. One, it looks like Russia is an unreliable ally and has no longer got the military strength to actually back up its own support for dictatorships around the world, but particularly in Syria, it could not defend Assad. Therefore, its status is reduced, at least, and we get an indication that Russia is a house of cards. It is not as strong economically or militarily as would appear in Ukraine. So that's one lesson. The second lesson is that Iran now has lost its corridor to supply arms to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So the rebuilding of Hezbollah becomes virtually impossible. And Iran now sees its only defense policy, really, which was the financing and control of proxies, Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, those sort of things. Iran is now, that is in tatters. So what will Iran do? Well, apart from continuing to be a nuisance in all the countries which it can destabilize in its own favor, Iran will now go for broke and try to go nuclear because it has to substitute nuclear defense for its proxy defense. That matters a lot because it actually makes the war with Israel the ultimate war to wipe out Iranian nuclear assets. It makes it more inevitable. And that is a very key point because when that happens, then that will result in total disruption in the Middle East, including the oil price, because the Straits of Hormuz are not going to be neutral in this war. Okay, going on further now, what have we got coming up? Well, one thing coming up is the US CPI and PPI. Keep a careful eye there on core inflation, which is sticky and well above the Fed's targets for average inflation. So that'll be that. I think we'll get figures which will make it virtually certain the Fed will cut 25 basis points, but not 50. We also, by the way, have the Australian RBA, the Bank of Canada, Brazil, and Switzerland, where you may or may not have your secret hoards stashed away. But in general, I think the tone will be set this week by the crowning meeting of all, when Madame Lagarde tells us what the ECB is going to do. And I'll tell you in advance what the ECB is going to do. It's going to hope like hell that some life gets back in the European economy. And Mrs. Lagarde has a theory that as inflation goes down, purchasing power of salaries goes up, and everybody lives happily ever afterwards because the salaries are not increasing in nominal terms, therefore not pushing up inflation. They do go up in real terms because inflation is coming down. It's a bit of a stretched hope in Europe, which is really desperate, that consumers will step into the picture. But I don't think the ECB is ready to take that message on board right yet. What the ECB is going to do is proceed in the manner of stately Victorian ladies, though it is not Victorian, and it is, but Madame Lagarde is, of course, a lady. It's going to cut 25 basis points, which is a bit of a foot in both camps. The economy is weak. The weakness of the economy is bringing down inflation, but it's not bad enough to make a big step. Actually, if there's one place in the world that needs a big step of 50 basis points cut, it is the completely moribund European economy, in particularly the dying manufacturing industry of Germany, which I must admit is not a monetary story. It's a story of stupidity and ignorance going back to another M, which is not M for money, but M for Merkel. Thanks for watching. I hope this was some good to you. And if you do like it, then like it. It would help us. But also, if you want to subscribe or have a free subscription for a while to our research, then go to www.quantumstrategy.org. And the quantum strategy can be uppercase, lowercase, or any case you like. Thanks a lot. Have a good week.